Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. I am so lucky. I get Krista Scott-Dixon back, and not everybody gets access to you, which I appreciate. And some people just know you by KSD, one of the few people in the industry who could actually get by, and we know who you are based on an acronym. So it's great to see you.
Well, it's great to see you, and I have the pleasure of hanging out with the legendary Andrew Coates, so I feel like the lucky one.
Well, you did get to speak at my event, although you were the draw. Everybody showed up to see you when I ran Evolve conference in 2023. So, and we got you back largely because you've got a new book. Now, this one, we're talking off air, it's probably a little more geared towards coaches and practitioners. It's sort of like a textbook, although in your own words, it's written in an 8th grade level. So anybody who's really interested in going a deep dive, it's called Applied Nutrition Coaching and Counseling Theory to Practice. So we'll talk about some of the things that'll probably be more accessible for everybody. So here's a fun place to start. In our modern world, can we trust hunger?
Oh, wow, right off the bat. I mean, yes, if you are under 1 year old, probably, but otherwise potentially not. I mean, there's just so many factors in our environment that take us away from being able to attend to our own internal cues. So I would say that for the vast majority of us older than babies, we probably want to be careful and curious about our hunger.
And I see this come up in 2 ways. I was talking to a client yesterday, and he's younger guy, wants to put on muscle. And then when he gets stressed out, he doesn't eat. And then, of course, there's the other side of it. So I say to him as well, that you cannot rely on your hunger cues here. So, and of course, then there's the people who stress eat, emotionally eat, or just feel high, dopaminergic, food engineering. That's all hijacked to hell. So how do we go about it then? Instead of relying on hunger, what do we do?
Well, I mean, I would actually say we can teach hunger as a skill. And it's funny that you use this example of people who get stressed out and don't eat, and then people who get stressed out and eat. And that's actually one of the case studies in the book where I talk about the role of stress in shaping appetite and hunger. And I have this case study of these two people that have equivalently stressful jobs, and one has gained 20 pounds and one has lost 20 pounds for the exact same reason, basically. It's just that they have responded differently. And so, like, what I would say is that hunger is actually a skill that we can teach. It's kind of like a few thousand years ago, we didn't need to teach people to move around, to be outside. We've lost the skill. I mean, we've lost the skill of churning butter, right? Or needlepoint, right? But all of these are teachable skills. So as a coach, we can simply teach our clients to relearn the skill of hunger and then practice it and understand what can interfere with skill acquisition or skill practice. So really, hunger just becomes like any other skill. And it's one of the skills that's sort of part of this broader project of what we call interoception, which is being able to sense into what your body is experiencing and then ideally respond accordingly. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Do you have to pee? Have you been sitting too long at your desk? All of these, I think, are things that we have maybe not lost, but are difficult to hear in our modern environment. So, interoception is like the meta skill, and then hunger is one of the sub skills of that.
Let's start with the person who struggles to eat. They don't have an appetite when they're stressed. Again, I find that this tends to be, in this archetype, the younger guy wants to put on muscle. We joke that they eat like birds. They just don't have a lot of hunger. And that's the struggle. They can't get enough calories in. And I usually just try to get them to eat on a bit of a schedule. So does that jive with you?
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because at Precision Nutrition, they used to run this scrawny to brawny program, which was exactly for this, right? Like guys who consider themselves quote unquote hard gainers, which basically means you don't eat enough and you probably need to squat more, right? And in the beginning, I don't want to say I poo-pooed it, but as someone who tends to stress eat, so I go the other way, right? And I've never forgotten to eat in my entire life. Like that concept is baffling to me. I was like, oh, come on. Like all you have to do is just eat more, right? But then I observed how these guys really did struggle to eat more and how effortful it truly was for them. And, there were guys like barfing after meals and stuff like that. So yeah, a simple start is just to eat on a schedule and, regardless of whether you're hungry or not. Now, if food is like horrendously aversive to you in this moment, obviously don't eat because you don't want to have all that hard-earned grocery money coming right back up, right? But in general, the practice for these guys is like, yeah, come up with a schedule, stick to it, have planned portions. Like this is how much I'm going to eat. It might take me a little while. It might not be super fun, but I'm just going to do it. I mean, that's really key. And I think that's also important for, let's say, athletes who, who might be training so hard, it's really difficult to get those calories in, or the training is suppressing their appetite, ironically. I actually have a friend right now who's in wildfire boot camp, and they just messaged me and they're like, I'm too nauseous to eat after a whole day of like rucking through the bush, even though they're expending like 10,000 calories or God knows how much, right? So yeah, eating on a schedule, having specific portions and a plan and some kind of prep around that too, where you're like, this is my Tupperware container of food. At 3 o'clock, I sit down and I put this in my food hole. And that's really, really key for certain populations.
And it's been something I've done for a very long time. So I remember pockets many, many years ago. Like I remember one particularly stressful relationship and breakup, and I didn't want to eat at all. I dropped weight. So I think I tend towards that category. But one of the things when I started in and around bodybuilding magazines and the culture and what have you, which would have been originally over 30 years ago, but certainly like formatively over 25 years ago, well, we still very much believed that eating smaller or certainly frequent meals help with metabolism. And so bought into that. So I actually had a timer when I was in my most formative phase of trying to put on muscle mass, where I would eat every 3 hours. Now, guess what? We know that there's no science to support the idea that this increases metabolic rate, but what does it do really well? It actually helps you get the volume of food you need. And so I actually put on muscle mass fairly effectively in those days. And it worked, just not for the reasons that I thought. And I wasn't really looking to worry about staying lean, but I thought frequent meals was actually important. It just helped me fuel.
Yeah. And I think you're pointing to how in the industry we often mistake the tool that we use to get an objective with the objective, right? So if eating, I remember at PN, we used to say like, tell our fat loss clients, like you have to eat 5 to 6 times a day, which if you're a fat loss client, like unless you're able to create little bird meals, it just doesn't make sense to tell people to eat 6 times a day, right? But the tool was have a structured eating pattern and try not to get too hungry, try not to skip meals because then typically it rebounds later on. But that's a tool, and that's one tool in your toolbox. And that is not the goal. We sometimes lose sight of like, what actually are we trying to do here? Gain muscle, lose fat, be stronger, whatever it is. So we get very caught up in our tools and our methods, our ways of achieving things. And we forget, like, what the hell are we actually even trying to do?
Let's flip this over now to the other side of the spectrum, because I suspect that's probably the majority of people who deal with stress eating, and one of their main goals is their metabolic health and their weight. So does eating on schedule, I think you just alluded to that, does that also help? Are there any other, like the tactics you tend to try to go to first to help people work through this?
Yeah, so for some people, eating on a schedule is very helpful because their pattern might be something like, I rush out of the house in the morning, I have a coffee. I am stressed out all morning. I eventually get around to eating at some point midday or mid-morning or whatever. But maybe I'm still really busy and I kind of skip meals and I rely on caffeine or protein bars or whatever. And then in the evening when I come home, it is game on. And that is when I ingest the bulk of my energy intake. And we all know where that goes, right? Like I always say, like no good food decisions are generally being made after about 8 or 9 p.m. Like no one is making a wise choice, right? In general. So for those people, having a schedule might be really useful because it disrupts that pattern. Now, for other people, it might be more useful to say, do not eat until you are physically hungry, because they've just lost so much touch with their hunger cues that maybe they're eating on a schedule. And this actually is me. I'm a very, not regimented, but I like to have a routine. And I noticed I was just trying to like check off boxes and do a good job rather than actually respond to what my body wanted. So for the second group of people, it actually works better to say, let's teach you hunger cues, that kind of 80% full, slow eating, such that you do not start eating until you are physically hungry, and then you stop when you're physically satisfied. And that may be 2 meals a day, provided we get all your nutrients and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's how it looks some days. Other days could be 4, like we don't know. It's quite dynamic. But let's not get freaked out when you're simply not hungry. Let's just follow that. Like your body is not going to let you die. And one thing I always reassure people about is like, you can fast for 21 days without dying. So if you go without a meal for like a few hours, I think you're going to live. And that kind of dials down the threat level a little bit. So there's kind of 2 different approaches for different kinds of people. And so what I argue in the book is we want to look at the client and what are their tendencies, what are their skills, what are their needs, and then how do we choose the right tool for the job there?
Is part of this discussion the modern food environment? We can use words like obesogenic. Obviously, we know that the food is engineered in combinations of fat, sugar, salt that never existed in nature until probably 2.5, 3 generations ago. And we know that this creates significant dysregulation of our hunger signaling. There's hormonal stuff going on there. We can get into that after. Can we, for lack of a better word, repair that by eating more nourishing, whole, healthy, minimally processed food? Is that a pathway? Or is that a better...
Sure. I mean, in the book, I talk about the so-called obesogenic environment, and I talk about it as a broader phenomenon, right? Because there's other factors in the mix. There's, one of the challenges with so-called obesity is not just that you have high body fat and high body weight, which can, for biochemical and mechanical reasons, create issues in the body. But you also typically see low muscle mass in the general population. So we're not talking about like world-class rugby players here, right? We're talking about regular people. So you also see low muscle mass. You also see sedentary lifestyles. You also see disrupted circadian rhythms, right? Staying up late at night, or whatever. You have, people debate what the contribution of this is, but you have environmental toxins, right? You have environmental factors. So you have all of, and you just have like a general baseline level of higher stress and emotional like activation chronically, right? So I kind of broaden this lens of obesogenic environment to say there's actually quite a lot of factors coming together at a nexus to dysregulate us. So eating nourishing food, eating wisely, eating thoughtfully, eating mindfully, knowing our hunger cues, that's definitely part of it. Like you're not going to make yourself worse by trying to choose foods that are nutrient dense, minimally processed, trying to cover your nutritional bases. Like that's never going to be a wrong choice. But there are people who say, oh, just eat whole foods and you're going to be fine. It's like, well, what about this person's shift work? What about their stress? What about them caring for their dying parent? Like, what about all this other stuff? We can't just say, oh, just eat this way and you're going to be fine.
I just trained a client in my basement who stressed out about her aging mother. There may be cognitive decline in play. And again, the stressful part, and she alluded to the fact that this stress is interfering with her sleep, and it's been making it a harder environment for her to keep weight off. Very real.
Yeah.
What's happening? We can do them sort of separately, physiologically and psychologically with hunger when specifically we're in a calorie deficit with the intention of losing weight. And why is that hard?
Well, part of it depends on how big the deficit is, right? And what else is going on around it. And so, we used to believe that when you quote unquote dieted, right, when you reduced your energy intake, you would just wreck your metabolism, right? And so we had this concept of you would go into so-called starvation mode. Um, and I mean, this is kind of a side quest, but like one of the things I like to, if anyone has a fear of starvation mode, I like to talk about actual starvation. Like, what does actual starvation look like? And, like what is required for starvation to occur? And so we used to have this fear of like, oh no, you're going to go into starvation mode and your metabolism is going to downregulate and you're never going to burn any calories and all this kind of stuff. That's actually not what happens. Now, if the energy deficit is too significant, you may get compensation mechanisms happening and kicking in that change your appetite, that make it harder for you to feel full, that make you think about food more. That can happen. But for a lot of people, it's really quite a psychological phenomenon. Really, it's more about, I feel deprived. I feel like I don't have any fun. I feel like I can't just relax and unwind and enjoy myself. That's, for a lot of people, often what happens, unless the deficit is quite significant.
Mm.
So I think a lot of what we used to say is like, oh, you're yo-yo dieting, you've gone into starvation mode, and now your metabolism is screwed. A lot of that is just that people did not change their behaviors when they went on a diet. So they would go on a diet. The understanding was it would be for a period of time, and then you would go off the diet. And at that point, you would just go back to whatever it was you were doing. So a lot of the issues were really actually more behavioral than physiological. But that said, obviously, the starvation studies show us that there are physiological compensations, especially if that energy deficit is significant and chronic. That's sort of the key piece.
I'll double down on a point you're making here about our understanding of metabolism. And I think this is one of the things that's like almost near perfect in terms of our ability to predict when you increase the calories back up out of a deficit, then we almost see a near perfect ability to predict the return of metabolic rate. Because yes, there is downregulation of a lot of people need. And I think it varies by person. Some people, they move a lot less. And so we just see it because base metabolic rate, one of the components of our calorie output, doesn't change almost at all. It's mostly meat that changes when we're in calorie deficits, if I understand it correctly. Or thermic effect of food only changes with the amount of food we're eating, the type of composition of food, and then up to your exercise. But our exercise isn't a big component of our daily calorie expenditure. So it's the NEAT that's the really big multiplier. But again, when we bring back the calories, we see the NEAT go back up again. And I think the only real exception is these extreme cases where they study the biggest loser contestants, where the stuff that they were doing was so astonishingly out of the ordinary that it did seem to, I guess I'm comfortable saying, it did sort of wreck their metabolisms, but they're a really rare case, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. And that's a great example of like starvation mode. Like they really were starving. and not just starving, but starving under conditions of significant stress, right? Like the stress is always in the mix. Like if I'm just chilling, like the example I like to use is when you fall in love, right? And you forget to eat because you're, oh my God, like it's so amazing. And all you can do is think about this person. And like, you don't have a lot of those effects because you're not experiencing that kind of chronic grinding physiological and psychological stress. And so I think that, we need to sort of understand humans as a little bit more robust and resilient than I think a lot of the literature has made it out to be. We also, like when I hear people say, oh, like I increased someone's calories because they weren't losing weight. Like on the one hand, I get that. Like maybe you just need to eat at maintenance for a while so this person gets out of a spiral of low energy intake and all of the things that it involves. Get them moving around again, like you said, right? Get them doing that NEAT and restore, give them some body heat back, right? But the idea of like a slow metabolism really just doesn't hold in the way that we think. And I would argue that actually stress is a much bigger contributor to this.
Let's go. Does behavior shape identity, or does identity shape behavior, or is it a bit of both?
Oh, that's such a good question. They are mutually reinforcing. Like, I think, so to use the example, like a lot of people will say something like, I need to get motivated and then I will exercise, right? Or I need to get motivated before I do something, or I need to feel energetic before I exercise, let's say. And so we kind of wait for this moment to happen, right? And then we will do the behavior. Now that moment does come sometimes. Maybe we get up on a Monday morning and we have an espresso. We're like, let's do this, right? But most of the time, the behavior has to spark something. The behavior, a lot of the time, has to come first. So what I tell my clients is like, we behave ourselves into motivation, into being, into becoming. So we start with the understanding that you are not the person necessarily that you wish to be, that you wish to become, that you wish to manifest. Maybe you used to be that person and you kind of got away from it. Maybe that identity is a totally new chapter for you. Whatever it is, there's a really good chance that we have to behave you into it. Now, that can start with a declaration of identity. You can wake up one day and be like, God damn it, I am going to pretend or act like a healthy person today. And I'm going to do the things that a healthy person would do. And right now, I don't feel healthy, but I'm going to just put on that hat and act like a healthy person would. So typically, behavior tends to be an antecedent of identity. But you can certainly make a very conscious decision of like, I wish to be this person. I no longer wish to be that person. And a lot of the time that does get forced on us, right? Like there's a lot of things in life that are before and after. Before you have a serious health diagnosis, after. Before you find out that someone in your life, is going through something significant, after. Or before before someone dies, after someone dies. Before you had this job and then you got fired, right? Before this injury. So there's a lot of befores and afters that can quite dramatically shift your identity. Having a baby, right? Before you were not a parent, now you're a parent, and that's for life, right? So there can be quite dramatic identity shifts that do happen, sort of outside our control or fairly suddenly. And again, we can consciously choose to manifest a new identity. For example, I think of the guys that I train with building the elite that I work with. A lot of them have decided, I want to be this kind of, special operator, first responder, whoever. And right now I'm just a guy or just a girl. And I need to work towards this. But I'm going to act as if I am this person and sort of take on this identity. So there's really quite a range. But what I would say is that they are mutually reinforcing, because as we start to do the behaviors, again, we behave ourselves into this identity. And I had this client once many years ago, shout out to Susan, who, like, she was a writer and an academic, and she needed to get in shape. And she did not feel like an athlete because she was a bookworm, right? That was her identity. And I was like, okay, so imagine you have this little teeny tiny athlete inside of yourself, like a little sprout. And all you have to do is just water that sprout to make it grow, right? And so as you water this little athlete and feed him or her, like they will grow. And it did, right? And she told me years later, like, yeah, now I'm actually an athlete. It is now a much more encompassing part of me. So that's maybe a helpful way to think about it for a lot of our clients, because a lot of our clients do come to us with preset identities. I'm the kind of person who blah, blah. I'm the kind of person who never blah, blah. And a lot of our work as coaches is actually that identity shift for them, especially pointing to evidence that maybe contravenes something that's not helpful, right? Well, you say you're not a healthy person, but I look in your food journal, I see 4 salads. So I don't know what to tell you, Brad. that's some healthy person shit right there. Like, you know.
I'll interrupt this episode for a quick but important side quest. While I don't think everybody needs to track nutrition all the time, tracking is one of the most powerful tools to make sure you're not eating too much or too little. And Macros First is my go-to app for me and my clients. Macros First has a free barcode scanner, and a premium version comes with a bunch of cool stuff to make managing your nutrition easier. Like, one, AI search. AI is everywhere now, where you can speak or type the foods you wish to save and log everything without having to search for each individual ingredient. Two, import recipes from a website. Save time creating recipes manually by importing all ingredients and instructions from your favorite recipe websites. No more searching for each ingredient one by one, just paste in the website. And three, this one's a big one for nutrition coaches. Follow unlimited friends so you can follow all your clients. And there's a lot more cool features. You can try the premium version of Macros First free for 14 days. Just download Macros First from the App Store. And during setup, you'll be asked, how did you hear about us? Type in the code Andrew. I often look at identity is powerful, right? I have to look at, all right, what is it? What is the identity protecting people from? Because if there's an identity that is protecting them from something, and this can manifest in all kinds of ways, then even if their stated goals say they want to accomplish this, and usually in our context, it's something health related. But if that identity is shielding them from something that's a more existentially threatening concept, then no amount of coaxing them through to change behavior is going to dislodge that identity. Do you have any thoughts there?
Oh God, yeah. Like I have a whole section in the book about things like what we call ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, which is basically bad shit that happens to you as a kid, right? Abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, whatever, right? Especially in women, we see a very strong correlation between eating issues and sexual abuse, right? And so for a lot of people, eating or body composition, I mean, it's kind of like that social media meme about how we hide our feelings in our muscles, right? Like a lot of people come to us, and this is why in the book I have a whole section on like trauma-informed coaching. A lot of people come to us with pain, with hurts, with injuries, and I mean like the soul injury kind, as well as the physical kind. And for them, the way that they're currently doing things is protecting them from the pain, or is helping them cope with the pain, is a reflection of what they've been through. So if we go in there and we start like smashing and like, you got to change this, you got to change that, it like fundamentally disrespects the work that they have done to keep themselves safe and sane and soothed and okay and getting through life, carrying this backpack of stuff that happened to them. So we really, the way I say it to my clients is like, we have to carefully, like thread by thread, unweave this thing. And at every checkpoint, we pause and say, is this okay? Do we have permission to continue doing this work? Which sounds a little bit therapeutic speak, which is, part of the book is about kind of bridging coaching and counseling language. But sometimes you have to get permission. Can we push into this a little bit? Are you okay? This is a checkpoint. I'm going to stop here. We can stay here for a while if you like. Are you okay with leaning forward a little bit? That tiny little step is so important. And it's no different than in the gym saying to someone, look, you had a great squat workout. We can stop here, high five, and go home. I feel like you could do a tiny bit more. Are you willing today to try something a tiny bit harder? If not, that's okay. But if you're feeling the vibes and you want a challenge today, let's do it. Otherwise, it's cool to stop too. Like, that's a perfectly appropriate conversation, right? And that is technically a therapy. If you're listening, I'm making finger quotes, right? That's a therapy or counseling conversation, but it's a very simple kind of question. So yeah, absolutely. There's all kinds of ways that our food or eating or not eating, or the kinds of foods we choose, or how we eat, how we wear our body in the world is designed to protect us from pain. And, for a lot of people, this is actually what happens with losing weight. They lose weight, they get to a certain point, something that has a symbolic association for them, whether it's a number on the scale, whether it's a clothing size, whether it's like oh, now I'm considering dating or something, like there's some behavior, and all of a sudden they freak out because they're no longer safe. And then they're like, nope, screw this. And then they go right back to it. So unless we tackle these underlying things, and again, like as a coach, maybe that's not within your scope of practice, but you should at least be aware that there's very likely something deeper. You don't have to go unpack it, right? You can refer to a therapist, but you got to understand that there's something deeper than my client is unmotivated, they are lazy, they are resistant, they don't want to do the work, blah, blah, blah.
There's something in there, and I love thinking about this in terms of expectations. So you pretty much said this, but I want to take it a little further. I think in this context, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but and I can't say this has been my experience because I was never obese, like BMI, whatever. Yes, absolutely. But like in terms of like carrying an excess amount of body fat, so it's not been my experience, but I believe and have observed that walking through the world, obese, morbidly obese for a lot of people, it's this weird contrast between being invisible in society in one way. And I like to call it invisible of expectations from other people. At the same time, you can't hide. And oftentimes you're very fully on display. And there's a lot of shame that is associated with that, right? But I think to what you're just saying is when your identity changes, then all of a sudden there's this narrative, this burden of expectations, what people think is going to happen. And I do believe that in some cases there could be a self-sabotage, that someone is not comfortable with embracing these changes and expectations. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do is instead of self-sabotage, I actually call it competing commitments or competing priorities, right? Because really that's kind of what's happening, is that there are things that are important to you that you have committed to or that you see as important and valuable. And now they're kind of coming into conflict. And you're making a choice to go one way or another, right? And there's different kinds of discomfort. And some people are very willing to endure certain kinds of discomfort, but not other kinds of discomfort. I mean, just as a silly example, a lot of the special ops folks I work with, they are perfectly willing to jump out of a plane. They are perfectly willing to starve and march 20 miles in the woods in the dark, like that's their jam. They are not at all comfortable with shame, with having difficult emotional conversations, with interpersonal stuff, right? Like they would rather stick their face in a blender than than talk about their feelings, right? So everyone has discomfort and people pick their discomfort. And often we choose the discomfort that is familiar to us versus a new kind of discomfort. So someone who moves through the world in a body that is simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, that may be deeply uncomfortable, but at least it's familiar. And so the discomfort of the new is much more scary. And so it's like, ooh, that's a lot to take on, especially without support, because no one really gives you instructions on how to do this. Like we tend, like you said, if you've been fit and active your whole life, this is the water that you swim in. Like you have no concept that this would feel weird. Just like, why wouldn't everyone want to do this? But for a lot of people, it's deeply distressing to make these kinds of changes. And so until we unpack this and understand this and understand how to guide people sort of over this hump, because I don't want the framing of this to be like, oh no, we can never fix this, or people are going to do these behaviors forever. It's like, this is when, as the coach, you're going to shine. This is when you're fighting in the trenches together with your clients to move them through this really tough crux point. So it's not like me versus my client. Now my client's getting resistant and what the hell is wrong with them? It's like, okay, now we're at war together. we're in the shit together, and I'm going to help you get through this. But the expectations piece, I think, is really, really powerful. And one of the things I talk about in the book is something we call obesity stigma. Sometimes people call it anti-fat bias. But the idea, and I've had this happen. So I have been obese. I was so I'm 5 feet tall. And I was about 170 pounds at one point in university. and I was having terrible hip pain. And so I went to the doctor, and he was basically like, now this was in like 1992 or something like that, when doctors were a little bit less sensitive, but he was basically just, you're fat. You're fat, you got to lose weight. I was like, okay, but I have hip bursitis because I was taking a step aerobics class because it was the 90s, trying to lose weight. So now I have acted in good faith trying to lose weight. And now you're just like, sorry, you're fat. This is why your hips hurt, right? So there is this problem with obesity stigma where when people with obesity feel bad about themselves and receive these negative messages from healthcare providers who should know better, as well as the rest of the world, it actually replicates the problem. So we cannot shame and bully people into getting fitter. It doesn't work that way. And in fact, the more that we shame and bully them, the less able they feel to change. So there's this interesting kind of cycle that happens. So if we impose negative expectations on people, people will deliver. Right? If we tell people you're a piece of shit, they're like, okay, I guess I'm a piece of shit, right? Like it takes a really strong salmon to swim upstream from that one. But yeah, I think you make a really good point about the simultaneous invisibility and visibility. Like, so this morning before we got on this call, I was trying to find images of people in larger bodies exercising for something. And I saw, like, I'm looking through the stock photography, right? It is all like horrible caricatures of like people stuffing their mouths in, or like sweating too much, or like just gross negative caricatures. So if you're a person in a bigger body, you walk through the world with that shit in your face all the time. And it's very demoralizing. So we have to expect as coaches, when our clients, who are looking for fat loss show up, they've already been through the ringer emotionally with expectations, pressures, criticisms, all this stuff. So we cannot replicate that. We can't be the place where they just get more criticism. We have to be the safe space where we can work on this together.
There's something else I was thinking about earlier, and I think it's worth throwing in there. I like the frame of the alter ego effect. And so there's famous examples where Beyonce has her Sasha Fierce, Kobe Bryant has his Mamba mentality, Eminem and Marshall Mathers. But what I remember my first couple of weeks as a personal trainer being absolutely terrified of making cold calls. But my first manager was a cheerful, smiley, outwardly confident person. And I remember, before I understood what the concept was, it got in my brain that I pictured myself, I channeled him, and I was able to smile. Smiling on the phone is actually a very powerful tool if you're ever in this situation. And I was able to make these calls, and these weren't truly cold. These were people who still had some sessions left. They hadn't come in a long time. Their trainers had left, or what have you. But it worked. And I think I just thought about this is you can try on an identity without having to commit to it to see what it feels like. But you can craft this alter ego that you can leave behind a lot of the other stuff, and it makes it a little bit easier. So it is a bit of a, mindset before you act, because I overwhelmingly bias, like, let's work on small actions and build evidence. And we can see how your identity shifts over time, right? But I do like this frame of trying on this identity. And I find that if you look around in almost every context, I think we all do this. We have those friends, those colleagues, those peers that we think that they're extremely confident and capable in certain contexts. What would so-and-so person do in this situation? And when I channel that, I find I actually I'm better with certain things, or I'm able to motivate myself or act on discipline better than maybe my default setting. And I find certain people function really well as avatars for this, right? So whether you form your own alter ego that you've manufactured or channel other people, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is a fabulous tactic, and I will share my own alter ego with you, which I developed when I was doing kettlebell sport. Now, again, I am a small woman, middle-aged woman. My alter ego is Lugash, and Lugash is a very large, enormous Russian bear of a man. Like, he's, 6'7", and he has a giant beard, and he's the kind of guy who just like wakes up, punches a bear, goes out, rolls in the snow, slams a mug of beer, carries 2 hams under his arms. Like that's Lugash, right? And so Lugash appears when I do certain kinds of activities. So Lugash is my alter ego. But this tactic works really well for clients who are imaginative. And so, for example, a lot of my special ops clients wanted to, or like first responders, they wanted to do these jobs because typically they saw a movie or they met someone who was already doing this job and as a kid or a teenager, and they were like, wow, right? And someone that they saw had this like iconic status for them, and they were just like, wow, that looks amazing, I want to do that. So we try to capture that feeling and that vibe for them. But there was one guy in particular who was, I remember, highly imaginative and really into Lord of the Rings and very much into Aragorn as a character, which is a great choice because Aragorn has all these facets of his personality, right? He's a king, he's a leader, he's a scruffy guy in the woods, like he's a fighter, like he has all these facets to him. And using the character of Aragorn, we were able to talk about certain qualities he wanted to emulate or certain contradictions within the same person and how that's okay, right? Aragorn is both the king and the dirty guy in the woods, right? And so with clients who have a lot of imagination, there's another client who we talk about the bear. Her animal is like a bear, and we talk about qualities of the bear. And so for clients who are highly imaginative, this is a great technique, and they will like it. It sparks something in them, and it also speaks as a tool to the usefulness of right brain techniques, what we might call right brain techniques. I don't want to be literal here, but techniques that are creative, that are non-verbal, non-logical, that are imaginative, that inspire people to play and create and envision. That's a fabulous tactic. And, so like, if I belonged to like a small boutique gym and I had a trainer, like if every time I walked in that gym, my trainer was like, "Привет, Lugash," and like high fives me and stuff, and like plays that like got me to, gave me like a little bear pin or something like that, it would be fantastic. And so the more that we can not just motivate our clients or push them or whatever, but inspire them, like that spark of playfulness and creativity. I think we really neglect this a lot of the time in our coaching. And the more we can bring it up, it costs nothing. It's easy. And it really helps our clients switch gears somehow. Like now they're having fun. Like now they are 7 years old, playing in the woods with a pointy stick or whatever, playing Let's Pretend, playing dress up. And now it's just pure vibes. Like the whole session is just coasting on vibes. And that's fantastic.
This made me think of, I've got a client, a really brilliant young man, and he talks about code switching. Now he talks about code switching in a very different context, but in this particular case, I think that sort of applies. You could just switch codes in the way that you show up in different worlds. And again, I think you kind of have two choices here, oversimplification. One is you can almost use this alter ego effect as something that you try on with the intention of becoming, change of identity, or something that modes that you can switch in and out of, like code switching, where you show up in different places in your life with different versions of you, and you can take that off when you don't need it in a different environment.
Yeah, I love that. Obviously code switching has a particular origin as a terminology, but I think that we can leverage the concept of recognizing that humans do have these multiple selves. And maybe it's fantastic for your client who is a square-ass accountant in their day job to come into the gym and act like an unhinged beast, because there's part of themselves that wants to be expressed. And so one of the questions, maybe I wouldn't necessarily ask it this way directly to a client, but basically it's like, what wants to be expressed through you? What is in there that wants to come out that we can give a space to in this environment? Now, I don't know if I'd ask it exactly like that. Sometimes it would just be trial and error and sort of seeing what your client vibes with. But basically, that is the question that we're asking. What are the dimensions of this human that maybe would love to be expressed a little bit more, that we can bring out in our coaching. Maybe people, I mean, the jobs that most of us work in 2026 really do not let us express a lot of these parts of ourselves, our physicality, our whatever, right? So as a coach, in a way, depending on where you work, your job can almost be like your client getting to go to playtime, however that looks for them. And you can construct an environment where they can code switch within that environment and play with that. And it can be a very conscious process. I mean, a very simple example is like going to judo, you bow in, you bow out. And the bowing is this kind of expression of, now I'm becoming a different kind of person here. I'm leaving behind all of the bullshit of my day and all that stuff. And in here, I'm becoming this kind of person. And then when I bow out, I go back to my regular life. So giving your client rituals, little tiny rituals to help them bow in and bow out, figuratively speaking, I think can also be really helpful. Like when you have this object, when you do this behavior, when you do whatever, now you are this kind of identity. I think that helps a lot, making it really conscious and explicit.
You mentioned play. So our last podcast conversation, we actually went into play. So anybody who is enjoying this, please scroll a bit. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I have a theory, and I wrote about this recently. I think that we're all scared kids walking through the world. And I think we all grew up, and I mean, my experience, the funny thing is I'm very cognizant of the fact this is not everybody's experience, but my parents were superheroes. They had all the answers. We were safe at all times. They were absolute rock stars in every aspect of life. And of course, put up this post and some people come in and be like, no, that was not my experience. I know lots of people whose parents, they didn't do it well on the surface, but you also realize as you get older that your parents were scared. They did not have a playbook. They did not have a clue what they were doing. They were really good at hiding the fears and insecurities from us. And I think our parents' generation were in between where they had to grow up and act like adults in every capacity. I think our generation, I mean, shit, I still play video games sometimes, and my parents didn't. So I think that's changed. But I think most people, if you let them feel safe to play, but also express these things that I think certainly I think our generation, we were kind of told that these are childlike things. We're not supposed to do this stuff anymore. So I think maybe part of this stuff, and I try to facilitate this with my client relationships, is I love talking about video games with my clients because they love it. And other things that we might associate with still being kind of childlike, Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering cards, for especially the nerd culture stuff you mentioned, Aragorn and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, I harp on this a lot, but it's really important for coaches and trainers to be aware of the world outside of fitness and nutrition and health. Like, have a cultural understanding. I am forever sending my clients memes, funny videos I saw, clips from movies, because these can express how our clients are feeling in a way that just talking about it often can't, right? And so like skill number one of the coach, which I talk about in the book, is empathy. Like you have to be able to understand where your client is at. Now, maybe you don't feel it the same way that they do, but you have to be able to take perspective on where they're at, or be able to express it back to them in a way where they're like, yes, you get it. You see me, you understand me. Like that's exactly how it is for me, right? Because unless that's like an unlock, unless you can unlock that feeling in your client, that they feel seen and heard and understood, like you get them and that you're on their side, they're never going to change for you. So you can't skip that empathy step. And so movies, TV shows, memes, like cultural stuff, the more you can be aware of that and share it and send it to your client and be like, oh, it reminded me of this. And they're like, oh my God, that's it exactly. That's when the connection really clicks. And a lot of these things, again, are not logical. They are not, left brain, so-called left brain stuff. They are imaginative. They are fun. It's cultural awareness. So you got to get out there and build your understanding of the wider cultural world, because that is what helps you connect to your clients, whether it's music, movies, TV shows, memes, games, I don't know, fashion, like whatever else is out there in the popular culture, travel. Like you have to enrich yourself so that you can connect with your clients.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries and the service isn't as much as you might think, and regular impulsive food delivery apps, eating out, that costs way more anyway. I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me Meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great. You can order custom meals. They deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes. We can finish up here. You mentioned meta skills earlier, and this is something that you also reference in the book. So what are meta skills? And maybe a brief treatment of why they matter, maybe some of the ones that are particularly useful for people who are trying to change their metabolic health and become more active, eat better.
Yeah, so there's some meta skills are basically like big skills, the skills that unlock other skills. So a good example of that is learning how to learn. Like, because, if you think about the last, like, I don't know, like however many years it's been, with technology, with AI, like our jobs have changed so much. If I were to, like, the example I use in the book is, like, okay, it's 1986 and I have learned to type on a typewriter, right? On a manual old school typewriter.
I took a class in that way back when I was young. Me and Dad did. Yeah, I took a class in typing. Yeah.
I love that. ASDFJKL semicolon, right? Like that's your home row. Now, if I'm going to put, typewriting on a resume now, that is not going to helpful. That's not going to help me, right? And so we have to understand that, especially now, the world is changing so quickly that if you focus only on learning to use a specific piece of technology or a specific tool or whatever, that tool may not exist in 5 years, or it may not be as useful. Like, now sometimes when I'm hiring and I see people like going, oh, like I know Microsoft Word. I'm like, I knew Microsoft Word in like 1991. Like I need something more, right? So meta skills are the skills that really unlock everything else. And our skills are kind of like, you can't see it if you're listening to this, but I'm making sort of an umbrella gesture. The skills that overarch everything else. So basically in the book, I talk about a few different ones. I already mentioned learning how to learn. So learning skills is really key. And not just like, oh, I know where to find information, but like, I know how to go through the process of learning. I know what learning feels like. I don't get discouraged. I know the components of learning and what it's like to go through that, right? So one group is like learning skills, learning how to learn effectively. Another one is practice skills. So as a coach, I really stress in the book, this is a skills-based book. This is not a book that tells you how to eat. It's not a book that talks about grams of protein. It is a book that talks about skills and then makes you go and practice them. As much as a book can make you practice, but it really emphasizes go out into the world and practice, especially deliberate practice, where you consciously, mindfully do a thing, observe what happened, gather data and insights, and based on that, decide what to do next. So there's like this feedback loop, right? Deliberate practice is really key. And most coaches honestly don't do it. You just do your coaching sessions and then you get on to the next client because you're so busy and, whatever. So the example I like to use is, why is a 50-year-old driver not 35 years better than a 15-year-old driver, or 30 years better than a 20-year-old driver, right? Why are 80-year-olds not the best drivers in the universe? Well, I mean, in large part, the number of years you've been doing something does not correlate with how good you are at it necessarily. The key thing that makes this work is this deliberate, mindful practice. So at the end of every session, I say to my clients, tell me how this session was for you. And don't be afraid to hurt my feelings because I can take it, right? And I practice out in the world. I constantly practice my coaching skills out in the world. Active listening, empathy, perspective taking, reflection, like asking good questions, constantly practice. Another set of skills that's really important is critical thinking and reasoning skills. Thinking skills. Oh, wow, I just heard this new fad where all you eat is grapefruit. And it, what did I see yesterday? Tonsil cleaning is like something. Oh, just drink hydrogen peroxide and it's going to clean out your tonsils. And I was like, I mean, it's going to clean out something, but probably not in the way you want, right?
Intestinal lining.
Just take that nasty layer of skin off. So with, in an industry where there's new stuff coming all the time in a way that is so hypey and so pseudoscience-y and feels so expert sometimes, we need to have our critical thinking on point to not get sucked into stuff. And then the final set of skills I talk about in the book is self-regulation and self-structuring skills. How do you handle your shit, basically, within yourself? How do you manage your emotions, your stress levels? How do you organize your time? Because a lot of us have somewhat unstructured time. Now, you may be working in a gym where it's like, your time is structured for you. But even outside of that, like, how do you structure your time? I had a client who was really struggling because he was a personal trainer and he had that like horrible personal trainer schedule of like early mornings and late night. And he was not organizing his sleep and his nutrition properly. So he was just getting like 3 hours of sleep and completely frazzled and all over the place and just melting down eventually. So how do we structure ourselves, our time, our productivity, our energy output? What do we do to recover after challenging sessions? All of that is in the mix. So all of these are skills that are going to help you do everything else in your coaching practice.
One of my favorite resources on deliberate practice would be Cal Newport's writing. In particular, his book, Deep
Yes.
Work, is great. And this sort of alludes to, because someone might hear, and I think people would correctly guess that it's not just the 10,000 hour rule, which Malcolm Gladwell popularized but misinterpreted. And then the original researcher, Anders Ericsson, actually kind of came out and said, well, no, it's not just blindly 10,000 hours, but it's specifically the deliberate practice of those hours. And so that Anders Ericsson stuff, Cal Newport stuff, and on the critical thinking skills, I actually have them over my shoulder. Great mental models books, and Shane Parrish's writing. He often goes by Farnham Street, and he also has a book called Clear Thinking. So I find his stuff's really good. We've thrown a lot of stuff at you, but at the listeners, but the book itself, I think, is a great resource. I think it'll bias more towards the coaches for sure. In fact, I think coaches, this is going to be something you want to do. I'm going to work my way through it. So sometimes if I have a advanced copy of a PDF and not the physical copy, I will do it on audio. But I can dump it into, if there's not yet the audiobook for it, I can dump it into a program called Speechify. And one of the cool features of this, as I was telling you before, is you can choose a handful of famous people. There's a short list of people who've licensed their voices, and it can AI make it instantaneous audiobook. It's actually insane technology. And so my choices are Snoop Dogg, Paris Hilton, Gwyneth Paltrow. And no, the whole Goop thing doesn't work for me. And Paris Hilton, mad respect, but again, I don't think I could handle an entire textbook in Paris Hilton's voice. But John Rhys Davies, another Lord of the Rings reference, Gimli, that's going to be my go-to. So he reads to me the books that I don't otherwise get on audio, and I enjoy the process.
Indy, that'll be him, right? Indy.
Salah from the Indiana Jones movies. Yep. I'm a longtime fan of John Rhys Davies. He's a classic.
Absolutely. Well, I would be honored for John Rhys Davies or Snoop Dogg. Either way, I think it can work.
I'm trying to remember. Oh, it was Brett Bartholomew for his book, Conscious Coaching. There's this big campaign. It didn't work out, but he was trying to get Tom Hanks, if I remember the story correctly, to read his audiobook. It never quite manifested that way.
Oh my goodness. People have such ambitious dreams. Someone asked me, hey, listen, do you want this book to hit the top 10 immediately? I was like, oh my God, I just birthed this baby. Like, it doesn't
Mm.
have to go to Harvard just yet. We can let it just organically emerge into people's awareness to begin with. Like, I'm still a little exhausted from from the birthing process.
I still find it really entertaining that you just will write textbooks for fun. You and Brad Deer, who I was with this weekend, you guys just seem to be able to, all the other things you do, and it's like, I'm just going to go write a textbook.
Yeah, with a totally normal hobby, obviously. And it's funny because like, okay, so this textbook is 750 pages. And just to give people like a real
Mm.
quick rundown of what's in it. So I talk about skills. I have lots of client case studies in there, and all of them are like real people that I worked with, or some representation of real people that I worked with. And we cover the gamut, like pregnancy, dying, gender, migration, like disability, like a whole range of things. And there's very specific, like a whole section is devoted to specific counseling techniques that maybe as a coach you haven't been told that you're allowed to use.
Mm.
But the book emerged for me from this kind of annoyance because I was like, oh man, like counseling and psychotherapy has such great tools. And by tools, I mean like questions. Like we don't have to be digging into people's childhood, but there's some great questions out there that really, get clients shifting and moving and changing. Why are we not stealing these? But there's a lot of paranoia of like, oh no, now I'm doing therapy. It's like, I just asked you what your hopeful future is. Like, that's not therapy. That's just being an interested human, right? So a lot of the book, or a significant portion of the book, is about these counseling techniques. Again, the super simple, lightweight, low friction version of them. But what can we steal from other disciplines that we can use in our coaching? And that was a question I started to get obsessed with. And so the early version of this textbook, before the publisher approached me, was something I called Steal This Coaching, which is basically like, let's look around, see the good shit, rip it off, with attribution. But like, there's a really good question from this field. Like from solution-focused therapy. Oh, I'm doing this, I don't like it. Cool, what would you rather be doing instead? That is just a question. Literally anyone can ask it. It's technically solution-focused therapy, right? But it's just a question. And so that for me was the impetus to actually write this book and also talk about populations or experiences that are often not well represented in coaching textbooks, like immigrant and refugee clients, neurodiverse clients, clients with disabilities, the rainbow communities, because I can't say the acronym all at once, but like, gender expansive clients, clients dealing with death and dying, like all of these topic areas that really don't get captured a lot of the time in conventional textbooks. Or they're like represented as special populations, quote unquote, rather than just humans. And so, the goal is to really equip coaches to deal with humans, because humans be crazy, man. Like there's so everyone is different and awesome and wonderful, and like there's so much wonderful richness in humanity. And so it's like this love letter in a way to humanity. So that was the impetus for writing the textbook. But yes, I would like to stress that writing a textbook is a completely normal hobby to have.
If anybody wants to write a book, just turn Krista Scott-Dixon into your alter ego, channel her, and go from there. Everybody can follow you Instagram, Stumptuous, STUMPTUOUS. And where do they go to get the book?
Well, okay, so right now, and by the way, I would also throw in, so Stumptuous is a bit old. Krista Scott-Dixon, I have actually gotten into the 21st century with my own website with my own name. So a little bit of a boomer here, but yeah, KristaScottDixon.com. Go there. But yeah, so the book will be available on the publisher website now. So now it's May the 1st. In a few weeks, they tell me it will be available on Amazon. So for folks who are international and, Amazon is just super low friction for most people, start looking for it there sometime in May.
Wonderful. I appreciate you coming on here. And everybody tuning in again, like, thank you for supporting. Thank you for going and supporting my guests. And because of that, I continue to be able to get the absolute industry leaders, icons, the founders of our world. I mean, Krista, you were one of the chief architects of the OG in nutrition, precision nutrition, right? And you've gone on to do great things. So thanks for writing this book. I'm excited to dive into it because to your point, I think that good coaching is rooted in asking great questions. It's not just telling people what to do. It's not programming. Those things are obviously, they have their role, but it's asking questions to help unlock behavior change that people decide that they want to engage in. So thank you.
Thank you.